Glad that you are here with us as we continue our series on the book of Romans. Today we are going to be looking at chapter 14 of Romans, which is one of the most interesting and relevant sections in the entire book and also in the entire New Testament. But before we dive in, I just want to let you know that you need to check out our website if you have not already done so, calhounchurchofchrist.com. There's a lot more biblical content on there, more videos like this, as well as articles. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up so that it will get to more viewers. Really glad to have you with us today. If you have any questions about this video, then please email me at calhounchurchofchrist@gmail.com. So, chapter 14 of Romans, that is a very, very interesting chapter. What we're actually going to do today is we're going to be looking at not only chapter 14, but we're going to be looking at the first 7 verses of chapter 15 because they all tie into the same topic. A lot of people have questions about this. A lot of people wonder if it's relevant. Well, it is relevant. It's very relevant. Let me tell you what was happening in the Roman church at the occasion that Paul wrote this. Basically, what was going on was apparently there were some people in the Roman church 2,000 years ago, and they had it in their heads that God thought that it would be a sin for Christians to eat anything other than vegetables. Apparently, they had it in their mind that it was the will of God that all Christians be vegetarians and that it was a sin to eat meat. Now, this might have had some influences from the law of Moses. It might have been the case that they had not gotten it in their heads that the Old Testament law of Moses was replaced with the New Testament law of Christ, and that under the old law, there were certain foods that were considered to be unclean, whereas under the new law, everything was created by God to be consumed. There weren't any things such as unclean foods. Maybe that had something to do with it, but as it was, there was a division in the Roman Church because the Christians who had gotten it into their heads, they were convinced that it was the will of God that they be vegetarians, that all Christians be vegetarians. Apparently, they would see some of their brethren who were eating meat, and these brethren understood that God had not made any such law in the New Testament that it was a sin to eat meat, and so they were going ahead and they were enjoying meat. Well, these other Christians who were vegetarians, they saw that their brethren were enjoying meat and they thought that they were sinning, and so they would rebuke them, and then the brethren who were eating meat were saying, hey, we're not doing anything wrong. Yes, you are. No, we're not. Now there's division in the church. And so Paul is going to be addressing this in Romans 14. Now, what does that have to do with us today in the 21st century? Well, let me ask you this. If you go to church, it's probably likely that you have seen some Christians try to bind their own standards, their own scruples on others. A Christian's conscience might be violated to, let's say, go to Applebee's because they serve alcohol at Applebee's. So it violates a Christian's conscience to go to Applebee's. And so he might see some of his other Christians, and they're going to go to Applebee's. Now, they're not drinking alcohol there, but they're going to go ahead and they're going to have themselves an appetizer and an entree, and they'll have water or soda or tea or something like that to drink. They're not actually drinking alcohol, but it doesn't matter. The Christian who thinks it just violates their conscience for them to go to Applebee's because they serve beer at that establishment. Well, they would look at those other Christians and they would say, well, how in the world could you do that? How in the world could you go to a place that actually has a bar right there in the middle of the restaurant and they serve beer? Well, we're not drinking beer. Well, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't do that. Well, do you see how Romans 14 would be relevant? So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Romans 14, and we're going to look at verse 1. As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. Now, notice what Paul's doing right off the bat here. He is acknowledging that there is someone in this church that is weak in faith, and he's also acknowledging that someone in this controversy in the Roman church is basically pushing not fact but opinion, their own opinion. So it's very important that he establishes that right off the bat. Someone in this argument is the spiritually weaker brother, and that spiritually weaker brother is pushing an opinion, not doctrine. Now, the next thing that Paul brings out in verse 1 is, the one who is weaker in faith than you, the one who is spiritually not as knowledgeable as you or spiritually less mature than you, you should still welcome him. But you should also, those of you who are stronger, you should also make sure that you are not arguing over opinions. Man, is that easy to do in the church. If you're watching this on Facebook, you've seen it. It's easy to do on social media. It's easy to do in the church. So, let's keep on reading. Verse 2. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Now notice he is establishing right off the bat that the ones who had got it into their heads that it was the will of God that they be vegetarians and that it was a sin to eat meat, he is calling them the weaker person, the weaker Christian. So he is right off the bat establishing the truth of the matter being that God in the New Testament did not in fact make a law that Christians must eat only vegetables. If you believe that God did that, then you are the spiritually weaker person. Why? Because you have not come to realize what God has actually taught on that. Now, verse 3. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Now, both parties are being spoken to here. The one who eats the meat, the one who knows that it's not a sin to eat meat, it's very easy to look at the one who thinks that it's a sin to eat meat and who is judging them. The one who is saying, hey, you eat meater, you meat eater, you're a sinner. It's very easy to despise someone, to look down on them. And what Paul is telling the spiritually stronger person, he's saying don't do that. The one who abstains from eating meat, you understand that there's nothing wrong with eating meat. It's not a sin to eat meat. They haven't come to that knowledge yet. Maybe they never will. Don't despise them. Don't look down on them. But then he also goes back and talks to the weaker brother too, the vegetarian. He says, hey, the one who abstains from eating meat, don't pass judgment on the one who eats. Why? Verse 3, for God has welcomed him. The people who had that scruple, who had been convinced that it was a sin against God to eat meat, the inspired apostle is telling them, don't pass judgment on the people who eat meat because God has welcomed them. They are not sinning. God is perfectly okay with them. You need to realize that. Now, verse 4. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. Now, he's still talking. If you look at the second part of verse 3, he's still talking to the weaker brother, the one who thinks that God wants us to eat only vegetables. And he is saying, why are you passing judgment on this servant? He's not your servant. He's God's servant. God will judge him. It is before his own master that he stands or falls. And look again at verse 4. Paul reiterates this. He will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. He is not sinning against God. God will uphold him. It is not a sin to eat meat. Now, what can we learn from these 4 verses about today's controversies? it when you have someone whose conscience is violated by something that scripturally speaking is not a sin, but to them it is a sin, well, you should respect that. You should respect that, and we're going to see more about. We're going to see more in this chapter about that. But at the same time, if they are trying to bind their own scruple, their own idiosyncrasy upon you, and you understand that God did not, in fact, give you this restriction that they are wanting to give you, then it is not a sin to just tell them straight out, look, it is not what you are wanting to bind on me is not something that God has bound in Scripture, and show them that. Okay? Now, let's keep on reading. Verse 5. One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats, eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God. While the one who abstains, abstains. Hold on one second. The one who abstains, abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. Now, he goes into not only the meat-eating controversy, but apparently there was another controversy too. Probably this is dealing with holy days, and this would have had influences from the law of Moses, because the law of Moses had holy days that were set aside that God wanted the Jews to observe, the Passover, Pentecost, things of that nature. Under the New Testament, though, the book of Galatians makes it very clear in Galatians chapter 4, verses 9 through 11, that there were no longer any holy days, that the only day that God had set aside was the first day of every week in order to worship and commemorate his son's death through the observance of the Lord's Supper. And let's read real quick Galatians 4, starting with verse 9. He says, but now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain. New Testament Christianity. Apparently they wanted to push the idea that New Testament Christians should observe Old Testament Jewish holy days. And Paul was stomping all over that. He was saying it's part of the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world. And by wanting to observe these things, I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain. Now, he was talking to the churches of Galatia as a whole. Galatians chapter 1, verse 2 makes that clear. The congregations as a whole, holy days, these holy months, these holy seasons, and these holy years. Now, go back to Romans 14, though. Look at verse 5. Now, he says, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Now, within the Roman church, apparently, there were some that were holding up a particular day as holy, and the others, they just looked at one day as no better than any other day. Notice what Paul tells them, verse 5. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. Verse 6. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats, eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains, abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. If these people who still think that you need to observe certain days as holy, like the Jewish holy days, they're doing it to honor God. The one who is abstaining from eating meat, they are convinced that it's God's will, so they're doing that to honor God. But the one who eats the meat, and although he doesn't say it here, it would carry over the thought, the one who doesn't observe a particular day as holy, they read the New Testament, the New Covenant, God has not given any such commandment. So by having that freedom and exercising that freedom, they are honoring God because they're doing what God has allowed them to do. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind, and they should do it to honor the Lord. Now, how does convinced that we should not do this, our conscience is violated, then others should respect that. But we should not bind it on others. Back up, then those who recognize that, they need to tell us that, and we need to respect that. But we also, here's something else to keep in mind in verse 5, a modern day example. There are men in the New to be observed. Jesus' birthday. But Romans 14 here, it says, I want if I want to observe a particular me and God, and I'm doing it to honor God, God's will. Let's keep reading. Uh, so then, whether we live or whether we die, who abstain from great because they belong to any particular day as holy. Because they don't live or die to them. Died and lived again, that he might be both authority in heaven and verse 10. Why do you pass the judgment seat of God? Confess to God. So then thinking that because so why they don't judge them, not you. Why do you despise to God? That's a quote to God. God is the ultimate solving the problem. And we should keep having lunch at Applebee's because, they covered in Scripture. On in verse 13 to but rather decide never to put Jesus that nothing is unclean in its by what you eat, you are no longer walking in love. Would be spoken of as evil. 13, we need to stop passing judgment. Needs to stop passing judgment on the one who is eating meat. They need to read part of verse 13. Needs to decide to not put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother. And then look at verse 14. Clean in itself. He's telling the vegetarian these meat eaters are not doing anything wrong. But then he's telling the meat eaters, look at the last part of are as of now convinced in their mind that it is a sin to eat meat. You need to acknowledge that. And if you continue to go ahead and just flaunt it, you're no longer walking in love. One of the things about love, in the biblical concept of love, agape love, is that love puts the interest of others before oneself. Agape love is self-sacrificial. Okay? If you have this freedom, but just do it anyway, you are no longer walking in love. But the opposite is true too. If you are trying to depend on your brother, the point he's making in verse 15, at the second part of verse 15 is, by what all, okay? Don't if it go to Applebee's in a possibly to fall away. End up falling away from the church. You understand that it's okay to teach them that. Let what you regard as good not a matter of eating. Just the consciousness. I want to focus on that one. Right. Peace. And do what matters is that it's his will. Nothing more. Approved by men. Each other a mutual and it is okay if on them or condemning them. His part in pursuing interests of their own. They and do not, for the sake of food, destroy. Paul's doing here. He is don't so hard to bring about me is okay. So if it offends your okay, first this. Condemned as sin. Wine to be free from the influence. Not get drunk with wine. The entire process of some people might get in their head. Alcoholic wines. He could have a little wine. Medicinal purpose. So what Paul is saying, to stumble. Verse 22 is the key. Hands in the New Testament. The faith that you pass judgment on him. Did not share our opinion. Politics is a great example. Beliefs with other people. And what violates Applebee's example again. Let's say that you believe some of them are going to go to Applebee's. Of the strife that to say anything about. It doesn't say God. Reason to pass judgment. No reason to think that they have no reason to pass. And that faith that's talking about your conscience. Even except otherwise, if you decide we're not actually mature. Obligation is being violated. Will who are strong need very to do that.